Hello again. So in this video we're going to look at working with fractions. We're going to start with equivalent fractions, then looking at mixed numbers and improper fractions, and finishing off with multiplying, dividing, adding and subtracting fractions. So here goes. The first question, equivalent fractions. The word equivalent just means equal to or the same. So we're looking for fractions that are equal to or the same as 3/5. Well, the easy way of doing this is if you multiply the numerator and denominator by 10, you could have 30/50. That's the same as 3/5. Or you could double that fraction and have 6/10. Or you could multiply the numerator and denominator by 5, for example, and have 15/25. That's all an equivalent fraction is. It's something that is worth the same but isn't necessarily in its simplest form. If we look at 2/7, well, I could just double that. I end up with 4/14. I can multiply both by 100. I have 200/700. And I could look at this fraction and half this fraction, so I end up with 100/350. The last one, keeping it simple, 210/220. 105/110, or I could just double the first fraction, 42/44. So equivalent fractions just means fractions that are the same but aren't necessarily simplified. Right, we're going to look at how we turn a mixed number into an improper fraction and going back again. So if we start with this mixed number here, 3 1/4, how do we turn that into an improper fraction? First of all, we need to understand what 3 1/4 actually looks like. So if we look at 4 circles, and if we quarter them, and then we shade in what we've got, well, we've got 3 whole circles, and then we've got 1/4 of a circle. So the question is, how many quarters do we have? There are 4 quarters there, 4 quarters there, 4 quarters there, and 1/4 there. So if we add those together, we end up with 13 quarters. There's an easy way of doing this. What we do here is we take the whole number and we multiply it by the denominator. So we do 3 multiplied by 4. 3 times 4 is 12. And there is the 12. And then what we have to do is add on the extra 1/4. And that one there is the extra 1/4. So I'll do that again. 3 times 4 is 12. Add the 1 is 13. So we end up with 13 quarters. Looking at this one here, 2 times 8 is 16. 16 add 7 is 23. And that gives us 23/8. Now in both of these cases we can't simplify any further, so they remain as they are. Okay, looking at question 3. So this is now turning an improper fraction, that's top heavy, into a mixed number. So this just means 17 divided by 5. So in other words, how many 5s go into 17? Well, 3 times 5 is 15, so I know that 3 goes in there, and the difference between 17 and 15 is 2, so the remainder is 2. So that will give us 3 2/5. But I personally wouldn't do it that way. All I would do is I would do it here. You can do most of this in your head. How many 5s in 17? Well, 5 times 3 is 15, and the difference between 17 and 15 is 2, and we just show that over the 5. So looking at question 4, doing it without actually writing out, how many 3s are in 23? 3 times 7 is 21. I know 3 goes in there 7 times, and the difference between 23 and 21 is 2, so the remainder is 2, and you put that over 3. And that's dealing with mixed numbers and improper fractions. So looking at multiplying and dividing, first of all with question 1, we need to turn these into improper fractions. So using our method of 3 times 5 is 15, add the 2 is 17. So that's 17/5 multiplied by. 1 times 3 is 3, add the 1 is 4, multiplied by 4/3. Now the key thing here to remember, or the key thing here to realise, is when multiplying fractions, we are multiplying the numerators together and we are multiplying the denominators together. So we have 17 times 4, which is 68. We have 5 times 3, which is 15. And that's our answer. The only thing we can do with that now is actually make it back into a mixed number. 15 goes into 68 4 times because 15 times 4 is 60. And the remainder is 8. So that's 8/15. Now, one of the things we can do when we're dealing with fractions like this is do something called cross-cancelling. So for example, if any of these fractions had the same multiple, we can simplify them. Or if any of these fractions have the same multiple, we can simplify, and likewise with those. So if we look across at question number 2, we do the same thing. So we recognise we're multiplying numerators and we're multiplying denominators. However, we can cross-cancel before we start. So what that means is 15 is a multiple of 3 and 3 is a multiple of 3. So they can be simplified. 11 is a multiple of 11 and 22 is a multiple of 11. So they can be simplified. Let's look at that. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 15 5 times, 11 goes into 11 once, and 11 goes into 22 twice. So now we can actually multiply the numerators. 5 times 1 is 5, divided by 2 times 1 is 2. That's our answer. We just now neaten that up and make it a mixed number. 2 goes into 5 twice, remainder 1, and we have 2.5. Let's bring all this together. So step 1 for question 3 is to turn that into an improper fraction. 5 times 7 is 35, add the 1 is 36, divided by 2 times 4 is 8, add the 1 is 9. When dealing with division, what we do is we change the sign to multiply and we flip the last fraction. So what we have here is 36 over 7 multiplied by 4 over 9. Now before we go any further, we look and say, can we cross cancel? So are any of these multiples of each other? Well, looking across, 9 goes into both 9 and 36. We can't do anything with these two, so we leave those two alone. So we say, well, 9 goes into 36 4 times and 9 goes into 9 once. So now we've got 4 times 4, which is 16, divided by 7 times 1, which is 7. And let's just turn that into a mixed number. 7 goes in there twice because that makes 14, remainder 2 over 7, and that's done. So that's multiplying and dividing with fractions. Moving on to adding and subtracting. This first question here, so when you add and subtract, you must have a common denominator. So that's the thing we're trying to do here, make denominators the same. So we deal with this in the same way. We make these mixed numbers into improper fractions. So 3 times 4 is 12, add the 1 is 13. So now I have 13 over 4 plus 7 over 8. Now I can look at making a common denominator. Well, I can multiply this first fraction all by 2, the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2. That gives me an equivalent fraction of 26 over 8, and then they're both over 8. So now I have 26 over 8 plus 7 over 8. So I've made a common denominator, which means I could choose to write it slightly differently. I could choose to write it like this. 26 add 7 all over 8. I don't tend to do that, but I want to show that in this case. And then obviously we're just adding the numerators, and that is 33 over 8. And finally, we show this as a mixed number. 8 times 4 is 32. So I know it goes in there 4 times, remainder 1 over 8. And that's our final answer. You'll notice that I don't write it like this in the next ones, but the principle is the same. Looking at number 2. So they're just fractions at the moment, no mixed numbers to deal with. So I need to find a number that 9 and 12 go into. So in other words, to make them a common denominator, or both go into 36. So I multiplied 9 by 4 to make it 36, which means I need to multiply that one by 4. I multiplied 12 by 3 to make it 36, which means I need to multiply that one by 3. So 4 4s are 16, 1 3 is 3. Now I can bring those together, that is just 19 over 36, and that is simplified. Okay, looking over here, starting with 7 times 8, 7 8s are 56, plus the 1 is 57, so that now is 57 over 8. Take away 3 over 4. Again, I can turn that second fraction into 6 over 8. 6 over 8 is an equivalent fraction. So I end up with 57 over 8 minus 6 over 8, and that will give us 51 over 8. And all we do now is we turn this into a mixed number. So 8 times 6 is 48. So we've got 6 8s in there. And the difference between 51 and 48 is 3, and that's 3/8. So we end up with 6 and 3/8. Last question. Same principle, 3 times 6 is 18, add the 1 is 19, so we have 19 over 6, minus 1 times 5 is 5, add the 2 is 7, so that's 7 over 5. We need to make these with a common denominator, so that'll be out of 30. So I multiplied this fraction by 5, and 19 times 5 is 95. I multiplied this fraction by 6, and 7 times 6 is 42. So now I have 95 minus 42, which is 53. And that's over 30. The last thing to do now is make that a mixed number. So 30 goes into there once, remainder 23 over 30, and that's done. As always, if you've got something out of that, please like and subscribe. The next video will be on converting fractions to decimals.